Welcome back to our literature class. My name is Percy, and today we are going to talk about English literature, particularly the Renaissance and the Romantic period. Now, I want to first talk about the term English literature because for many Filipino students of literature, without the proper understanding, we would usually attribute English literature to anything that is written in English. But this particular lesson is all about the literature of England or British literature. That's why it's called English literature. It's not similar to any other literature that is translated or written in English. Now, if anybody would survey English literature, there are so many periods that a student would go through to be able to see the development of English literature. What are these literary periods? I am pretty sure that in your junior and senior high schools, you have already encountered popular names in English literature, such as, of course, William Shakespeare. We have John Donne, Christopher Marlowe, Sir Walter Raleigh, and of course, we have William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Percy Bysshe Shelley, my favorite, my name, and of course, William Blake, among many. There are so many prominent names when you talk about English or Anglo-Saxon literature. But this particular episode will only zero in on the Renaissance and the Romantic period. We will not cover everything in English literature, but only these two, I would say, prominent periods. First, we need to understand what we mean by Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. Rebirth of interest in Greek and Latin classics. There is also an emphasis on humanistic education for statesmanship. So that means the goal of education is for them not just to be a better citizen of their society, of their communities, but for them to aspire to be a statesman, to be somebody who would contribute to the greater good of society. So that is the purpose of education back in the Renaissance period. There's also that focus on the individual and a concern with the fullest possible cultivation of human potential through proper education, focus on individual consciousness and the interior mind. So when you talk about the focus on individual consciousness, back then in the Renaissance period, and of course later on in the Romantic period, you will also see traces of this one, there is that struggle when it comes to the rulership of the few. So that means, because we all know that for the most part, leadership and influence are centered on a few influential group or influential people. But during the Renaissance period, there's that focus on the individual consciousness. So that means people are being heard. People are being regarded as important when it comes to their opinion and their ideologies, their ideas. Another thing is the concern with the refinement of the language and the development of a national vernacular literature. There is that emphasis now on the importance of these people's culture and language and upbringing and background and context and what have you. The focus, the attention is deliberately transferred from the few influential ones to the majority. That is part of the Renaissance or the rebirth. For us to be able to illustrate this better, I want to quote Robert Herrick's To the Virgins to Make Much of Time by Robert Herrick. Let me just read this poem for everybody. Gather your rosebuds while you may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer his to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worst and worst times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may, go merry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. To the Virgins to Make Much of Time by Robert Herrick. There are several studies already about the theme and the message of this poem. Some are very psychological, some are very sensual for that matter, and we will not go through all of those analyses. One of the things that I want to emphasize in this particular piece of poetry from 1648 by Robert Herrick in relation to the Renaissance period was actually how people are being empowered. When you look at the persona of this poem, it's actually obviously a man who's addressing a woman, a virgin, as the title suggests, to the virgin to make much of time. Now, the persona here is addressing the woman by saying, gather your rosebuds while you may. When you talk about the image of the rosebud, you know, it's a flower that is young, that is about to bloom. It's not yet fully, developed, but it's about to bloom. It is still fresh, as the description says, followed by that line, old time is a flying, and this same flower, addressing the rosebud, this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The persona is saying that this rosebud, as fresh as it is right now, time will come, it will die. Time will come, it will decay. And while you still have the opportunity to get this, to harvest it, do it. Because tomorrow, it will die, just like what first stanza said. And then, moving forward, the glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer his to setting. There's that description of the cycle of the sun, from the rising to the falling, the sunrise and the sunset. And it communicates time. So what the persona in this poem is saying, according to Robert Herrick's second stanza, is that everything is time-bound. Because everything is time-bound, time is of the essence. We are probably in the morning period of our life, but time will come, whether you like it or else, you will be to your sunset. Whether you like it or not, you will go to the sunset part of your life. So that means it will end one day. And going back to the description of, or the image of the rosebud, as young as it is, gather it. Gather the rosebuds while you may, because it will die some other time. Stanza 3, that age is best, which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worst and worst times still succeed the former. While you are still in your youth and your blood is warmer, diba? In Filipino, they say, mainit pa ang iyong dugo. You're still passionate, okay? Don't think of anything else. But you are still passionate. While you're still passionate, take advantage of the opportunity. Take advantage of the things that you can get, the things that you can do, the dreams that you have. That's basically what the persona is suggesting. Reminder for everybody that time will continue to succeed your youth. Time will continue to overcome your prime, the prime of your life. As young as you are, probably you're listening right now, you're in your 20s and maybe younger, or maybe in your 30s, you're still relatively young. And the poem is suggesting that there are opportunities that you need to gather, just like the rosebuds, while you still may. Because time will come, tomorrow it will die, tomorrow it will be gone. How many opportunities have we missed already because we're afraid, we're shy, because we feel like we're inadequate, or we're not prepared for it, and now you regret because you have not taken the opportunity. That's what the message of the poem is. Last stanza, then be not coy, but use your time, and while you may, go merry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. Now, this is very specific because we are not just talking about time here and the element of being young and growing old someday, but it's specifically addressed to a woman that the persona is trying to woo, trying to probably to court or to win over. And what the persona is saying to the maiden, or the woman, the virgin, to be exact, is that while you're still young and you are still full of passion, you're still young and warm, quote unquote, let's marry. Sabi niya dito, di ba? He said here, while use your time, while you may, go marry. Let's take advantage of our youth, and you know what I'm talking about, and let's get married, because we will not have all of this time when we grow older. That's why the title already suggests to the virgins to make much of time while you still are like a rosebud. And it's very interesting because when you look at the rosebud, it's still a flower that is not fully bloomed, that's not fully opened. I don't know what that means, but when you look at the imagery and its symbolism, you can go as far as you want. Okay, so it's up to you to think about it. Probably in other courses in literary criticism, we'll go deeper. But at this point, what this particular poem is suggesting is actually the theme of Carpe Diem. Carpe Diem in Latin, in English, it means seize the day. Seize the day, gather the rosebuds while you may. So that means take the opportunity. That means do not waste time. Carpe diem. In relation to the Renaissance period, Carpe diem empowers a lot of people to take advantage of the opportunity around them. Because we know that, just like what we said a while ago, there is that focus from the few powerful in the classical and the medieval period, but in the Renaissance period, it's slowly being transferred and to people, and people are being empowered. And because now they are being noticed in society, it's now time for them to seize the day. It's now time for them to carpe diem, to gather the rosebuds of opportunities while they still have the time. So Carpe Diem literally means seize the day. It is a literary theme that urges living and loving in the present moment, since life and earthly pleasures cannot last. Okay, remember that life and earthly pleasures cannot last. That's why in the Renaissance period, there are a lot of rebirth from the term Renaissance, rebirth, a rebirth of passion, a rebirth of ideology, a rebirth of love for the humanities, a rebirth for love of society and your contributions to the statesmanship. These are some of the things that you will notice in the Renaissance period. Some of the names that you have to encounter as part of the Renaissance period are, of course, the sonneteers. We have Shakespeare, Spenser, and Petrarch, but some of them are not English. Some of them are Italian, Roman. But you know Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is one of the biggest names when it comes to not just the sonnets, but when it comes to Renaissance literature. And since I've already mentioned that, sonnet is one of the contributions of William Shakespeare among many. Of course, Romeo and Juliet, we have all the dramas, the play, and some of the other pieces of poetry. What is a sonnet? A sonnet is a 14-line lyric poem which conforms to a specific rhyme scheme. Usually, not always, but usually it is in iambic pentameter. Now, I will not discuss what iambic pentameter here, but I have a previous discussion on iambic pentameter, so I will just link it below or probably search it in some of my videos, previous videos about rhyme scheme, about poetry. So we have a discussion on what iambic pentameter is. But Shakespeare is one of those names, prominent names when it comes to the sonnet. The rhyme scheme of that iambic pentameter is usually in A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and G, G. This kind of sonnet is divided into 4 parts, 3 quatrains and 1 couplet, which is indented. Now, quatrain from the word quattro means 4, so that means it's a stanza with 4 lines. It's a quatrain. And 1 couplet, couple, so that means 2. So it means 3 quatrains of 4, so that means 4 times 3, 12, plus couplet, that means 14. So that is a 14-lined piece of poetry. So that is a sonnet. And the quatrains, or the 4 lines, express related ideas usually, while the couplet, or the last 2 lines towards the end of the sonnet, sums up the poet's message. That is basically the gist of Renaissance period. Again, when you talk about the Renaissance period, we're dealing with all of the rebirths when it comes to ideology, when it comes to art and literature, humanities, and people are getting empowered. And one of the themes, just like what we already featured, is Carpe Diem, or seize the day. Okay, now moving forward, we will jump to the Romantic literature, or the Romantic period. And this is one of the most misunderstood periods of literature as well in English literature. Now, commonly when you talk about romantic, we think of romance, we think of love. we think of lovers and passion when it comes to relationship. But that's not what romantic literature is, or that's not what romantic is all about. Of course, there are touches of that, but it's not basically synonymous. Not always synonymous. Okay, so what is romanticism? Romanticism is an attitude or intellectual orientation that characterizes many works of literature, painting, music, architecture, criticism, and historiography in Western civilization over a period from the late 18th to the mid 19th century. So Romanticism is a period, not an emotion. Let me clarify that. Again, romanticism or being romantic is attributed to a period in English history, not literally about romance alone. So when you hear the word romantic now, I hope you're not just thinking about romance. Okay, you're thinking about English literature in general. You're thinking about the period of history. Okay, romanticism can be seen as a rejection of the precepts of order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, and rationality that typified classicism in general and late 18th century neoclassicism in particular. It was also, to some extent, a reaction against the Enlightenment and against 18th century rationalism and physical materialism in general. Now, we have mentioned a lot of terminologies here. Let me just simplify it for everybody. When you talk about romanticism, this is a rejection of the idea of order. Back in the classical period, and of course in the neoclassicism, neoclassical meaning the rebirth of the classic, the new classic, literally. So when you talk about romantic literature or romanticism, it reacts against or goes against the order of harmony, of calm, of balance. Because in the classical period, everything is harmonious. In the classical period, the presentation of arts and beauty and aesthetics and humanities in general are all in order. There's the emphasis on, let's say, harmony. When it comes to texture and color, when it comes to ideas, there is that rationality. So everything is beautiful. The standard in the classical period is always good, quote unquote, good. But of course, just like what we said a while ago, the idea of good back then was controlled or influenced by an elite, a few powerful ideology or a few powerful people who actually determines what is good. That's why when you talk about the classical period, you will have prominent names, and they're the only ones who define what beautiful is, what harmonious is, what intellectual is. But in the Romantic period, they are rejecting all of these precepts. They are rejecting all of these ideas by saying that it's not supposed to be just the standard. What we're saying is, of course, there should be an emphasis on not just the standard, but on who holds the standard now. Romanticism emphasized the individual, the subjective, the irrational, the imaginative, the personal, the spontaneous, the emotional, the visionary, and the transcendental. So that is the answer there. Romanticism is putting emphasis on the individual instead of the idea of beauty, just like what I said, which is influenced by the elite. Now, it is being transferred to the individual, similar to the Renaissance period. Of course, in the Renaissance, it's a rebirth. So it's kind of like the starting point. But the Romantic period is not just a continuation of that idea, but a blossoming of, or let's say the climax or the highest peak when it comes to the emphasis on individual and subjectivity. Now, beauty is not just about what is classical, but beauty is about my perception as a viewer, as a critic. So when you say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, that's very subjective. And it simply means that the standard of beauty is not based on the classical ideology of harmony, of calmness, of rationality, but the idea of beauty is now dependent on the one who's viewing it. That may be beautiful to you, but may not be beautiful in my eyes. So it's becoming subjective. Okay, so it is now focused on the individual, not just the standard of harmony and beauty. Now, some of the characteristics of romantic literature: we have the rage for roots, quote unquote, triggered by linguistic discovery. There's that growing fatigue with rule by the few. Of course, there is the uncultivated popular imagination as equal or even superior to those of the educated court poets and composers. It means that popular imagination of the masses of the people are now attributed or are now equal or even superior to those of the educated ones. So the idea is not just coming from the ones who are educated, quote unquote, the poets or the composers, but also the common people. Now the common people has an equal footing, an equal say when it comes to idea, when it comes to knowledge, and when it comes to literature and arts. Now, some of the themes of romantic literature: we have naturalism. The new romantic taste favored relative simplicity and naturalness, and these were thought to flow most clearly and abundantly from the spontaneous outpourings of untutored rural people or from the meditative reveries of poets. We know that the idea is going against idealism, wherein the idea is centered on the few. Exoticism is another theme of romantic literature. It's the interest in the medieval art and architecture, similar to a celebration of Western European creativity. So the fairies, witches, demons, and monsters of the medieval imagination reappear in a new genre, the Gothic novel. So if you are into Gothic literature, you are into these characters such as the witches, we have the fairies, we have all of these demons, monsters. These characters originated from the medieval period, but there is that revival of all of these Gothic classical and medieval characters. Number 3 is emotionalism. I think this is where love and passion would come in. As a further reaction to the strict formality and cool rationality of Enlightenment era art, emotion, particularly Gothic, horror, amazement, sexual titillation, as well as the tender sentiments of affection, sorrow, and longing became the subject of romantic period art of all kinds. It is this sometimes sentimental feature of romantic poetry that is most foreign to modern tastes. Its tendency to wallow in sorrow, to emphasize longing, and position its narrators as occupying places of lonely alienation occasionally crosses the line into the mawkish and melodramatic. Romantic poetry and novels are characterized by sentimentality and characters in thrall to powerful emotions and in search of sublime experiences. So that's why during the Romantic period, storylines such as passion, alienation, the feeling of being alone, all of these emotional expressions are part of the romantic literature. Again, this is not just about love, but it also talks about sorrow. It talks about sentiments. It talks about, wallowing in pride and despair. These are some of the things or heavy emotions that you will see in romantic literature. Other than that, we have exoticism. Exoticism, a further means by which the Romantics distanced themselves from the emphatic empiricism of the Enlightenment, was to imagine parallel worlds and times through which to contemplate new ways of approaching relationships, religion, and politics. The Romantics often symbolize alternative modes of living and thinking, as well as the authenticity and naturalness of those living in pre-civilized states, with images of foreign places. We see Spain, Italy, and particularly the Near East and Northern Africa as the setting for a number of poems and novels of the period. When you encounter some of the pieces of poetry written during the Romantic period, you will see all of these places such as Spain, Madrid, Barcelona. We have all of these places in Italy, Africa, the Near East, Mesopotamia, all of this revival of the land outside England. These are some of the features of romantic poetry. Okay, so we call it exoticism. That there is that parallel world. There's that exotic idea when it comes to an imaginative universe, an imaginative reality. So that means in the Romantic period, writers are not just thinking of their literal setting or milieu, but they're also thinking about what could have been in terms of a possible reality somewhere out there. That's why exoticism is one of the themes of Romantic literature. And of course, we have individualism. In the literary arts, romantic heroes differ from traditional literary heroes in that they tended to challenge rather than champion the social and moral values of their time. Most romantic writers saw themselves as heroes, the champions of a cult of the sense and the heart. Later, 19th century intellectuals celebrated the heroic personality, especially in its dedication to the causes of liberty and equality. Individualism, from its rebirth in the Renaissance period, has developed in its full sense in the Romantic period. That's why during the Romantic period, individualism, or the high regard for individual people, the commoners, the people not of power, the people not of influence, these people are contributing equally, treated equally in terms of their ideology, in terms of their contribution to society. Hence, individualism is a strong theme of Romantic period. Now, if you look at some of the pieces of poetry of the Romantic writers, such as William Wordsworth, we have Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, some of the things in our module, you will see these themes: exoticism, parallel universe. You will see all of this strong individualism, emotionalism, and some of the other themes of the Romantic period. Now, I hope that as we recall Renaissance period and the strong theme of Carpe Diem, or seize the day, and of course the Romantic period, it's emotionalism, it's individualism, it's naturalism, and Gothicism. I hope that this will give us a better view of English literature as we now read Renaissance literature like Shakespearean sonnets, or as we read some of the romantic pieces of poetry from the writers that we just mentioned. This will give us a different understanding of how to interpret and analyze English literature. That's it for our quick episode on English literature today. I hope that you learned something on the Renaissance and the Romantic period. And please remember that English literature is not anything written in English, but we're talking about the literature of England, or what we call today as British literature. That's it for today. Again, my name is Percy, and happy reading.